Okay, I'm going to show how to do a ladder stitch, and I have just sewn 2 pieces of fabric together with roughly, it's not exact by any means, a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this is what it looks like on the wrong side. You could iron these down like a seam allowance. That might make it slightly easier. This is what it looks like on the correct side, which is the side we're going to be working from, because the reasoning behind the ladder stitch is to close up an opening with a stitch that you cannot see. So we may actually be able to see a little bit of it because I'm going to use red thread, but I want you to be able to see the stitches. So I just have regular Coats and Clark, because that's the red I have, on a needle. I do double my thread typically because I like to knot it at the end. And then I'm going to bury that knot inside the seam. So how I'm going to start with this is I'm going to get my fabrics folded over like this somehow. Often when you do a seam, you don't have an ironed section. You just have something like this. So when you need to go on the right side of the fabric and get those fabrics aligned, you have to kind of fold them both over along the same trajectory as your seam. So kind of you want to work that out about a 1/4 inch folded over. I like to pin just a few pins to hold it in place, especially because a lot of the time when you're doing this sort of stitch, you are closing an opening that might be stuffed. This specifically happens when this is a stuffed animal, my goose pattern. And in this case, I have my opening along the bottom where I stuffed it pinned up so I can do a ladder stitch on that. So what I like to do is after I have it pinned, I need to get my thread in there and get my thread kind of buried. And usually what that means to me is I kind of go to one of the end where it is the stitches, the seam has stopped, and I like to grab the seam allowance down from where the seam is just a touch and put my needle through there and then grab my knot. That puts my knot down into the seam, and I'm right-handed, so you may need to adjust this if you're left-handed. Then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it basically where the knot is and come back at the very start of where that seam ends and my opening begins, and I'm going to pull my needle up into the actual crease of that seam right at the edge. And I'm trying to be careful not to get it tangled. So I do that this way, but then I want to stitch this way. So for me, turning it back around works best. So there is a little bit, for me, rotation of my actual fabric in this. Then my next stitch is going to go in the crease on the opposite side directly across from where my thread is coming out on this side. So if my thread is back here on this side, directly across in the other crease, I'm going to put my needle in. I'm going to rock it down the crease a little bit, about a stitch's length, and come back up directly in that crease. Pull it tight. Then I'm going to go back to the other side, the other crease, in the exact same parallel point and rock it back up. You can do this a few times, and you can kind of leave those stitches, like, because you see those 2 stitches where it kind of looks like the rung of a ladder. You want those stitches to be as parallel as they can be, keeping them straight across. So this is different than a whip stitch that goes at an angle. Then after you have 4 or 5 stitches, you can then kind of pull your thread, and it makes those stitches invisible and pulls that seam together. And then you just continue on the way. I like to pull those stitches closed like that every 3 to 5 stitches because if you wait too much longer, or you can pull it as it just happens. Usually if you're using the stitch to close something that's stuffed, there are a few stitches open like that, and you do kind of need to pull it to close them. This, since I'm just have fabric here, they're kind of automatically closing on their own. So you just keep doing that all the way across. I am trying to keep my stitches in about an 1/8 of an inch size range. They're definitely going to be larger than your stitches by a sewing machine, but hopefully you can still keep them small so that when you flatten out this seam, it just looks like a continuation of the seam. Like you do see, if you do pull on it a lot, you probably have a little bit bigger gaps than when you pull on it like this, but you can just pull your thread a little bit tighter, but you have a nice, very invisible look to your closure. So that is what a ladder stitch is, and is a great stitch to use for closing up stuffed animals, for closing up pillowcases or pillow forms, I guess, that are stuffed. Anything that's stuffed, as well as anything that's not stuffed, like if you have an opening where you're turning an item of clothing right side out and that clothing is flat, you can use an invisible stitch to like close up the lining. Okay, we are at the end of our opening where our last ladder stitch is coming up just about where our seam starts on this side. So we want to just tighten that all the way up so we have a nice smooth seam. And then how I like to end this, because we don't want to see a knot here, and sometimes we don't have access to the other side of the seam. So what I like to do, and remember this thread will be matching your fabric ideally. I like to grab right, so my thread is coming out of this side. So on the other side, I like to grab the smallest bit of fabric, like 2 or 3 threads, pull my needle through, and then I grab this knot. That gives me 1 knot. Okay, I got it like twisted twice somehow, but as we pull that knot closed, we're going to have a very small knot right next to the seam, and you may or may be able to see it. And then I want to take my needle and push it basically right under the knot into that fabric. And then I'm going to take my needle as far out as I can and pull it back out somebody else, essentially burying the threads for that knot. And then I cut my thread out there. So that knot has completely gone away. I've kind of pulled it under the fabric, which you may be able to do depending on your fabric thread count, or just if you don't have a very contrasting thread like that, you won't see the knot anyway. So that's our ladder stitch to make an invisible seam. I did a little iron so I could iron the seam allowance on the other side. And you can see that it is very clean. You can't see the threads. This is what the backside looks like. Nice even stitches. Ideally, they'd be a tiny bit smaller, but still pretty much in line with your seam. And I don't know, is a nice finish That I think would be great for you to try if you want an invisible stitch finish.